When I started talking about containers, back in DOD, to IT teams, not just random people,
Mhm.
they thought I was talking about shipping containers to Afghanistan, so shipping containers. Now, what we end up doing is focusing on very impactful outcomes. The first thing we did is, deploying Kubernetes on the F-16 jet, on 50-year-old hardware, and be able to start running, Python and Go on something that used to run C and assembly, and be able to show, modern use cases on a 50-year-old platform. That was a big win in 45 days. And then we moved to, B-21 and F-35 and F-22s and ships, and really sky was the limit. And then we did, actually space with the first deployment of Kubernetes in space, and with SpaceX, and we did a lot of pretty cool stuff.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Future of Security Operations podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Nicolas Chaillan. Nick is a security leader who has held several high-profile roles in US federal agencies, including Chief Software Officer for the US Air Force and Space Force. He was Special Advisor for Cloud Security and DevSecOps at the Department of Defense and Special Advisor for Cybersecurity and Chief Architect of Cyber.gov at the Department of Homeland Security. On top of that, he's founded 13 companies, including currently Ask Sage, a GPT-powered platform that brings generative AI capabilities to government teams. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
I've been really looking forward to this. There's a huge amount I can ask you about, but I think I'd love to start by, I suppose, just talking about your interest in tech. I read that you founded your first company at the age of 15. Where did that interest in technology and entrepreneurship come from?
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but it started pretty young. I was coding at 7. I mean, back then, everything was a little bit harder than it is now. Kids nowadays have, everything at their fingertip, right? If you look at even learning how to code back then, I didn't speak English, born in France. And obviously that was tricky because all the books were in English. And so I had to literally read the code and try to guess what it was doing. It was much harder to learn, so I guess people can complain now with ChatGPT and all the tools that we have access to with Google. You can learn pretty much anything. And so I started very young, started to build some apps and games, and then joined the team to join the PHP team to open source this programming language. And
Mhm.
so I was 14 at the time, and then, at 15 and a half exactly, I created my first company.
Wow. You gravitated towards cybersecurity at a pretty early age, as well. What attracted you to the security space?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how my brain works. I think I always see kind of stuff people miss when they're, coding. So I was always very good at finding, issues, and particularly, vulnerabilities. And so I guess it was just a natural thing for me to focus on cyber, and really kind of try to bridge the gap between cyber and software, and really, find the right balance between innovation, compliance, all the paperweight that goes with it, and the velocity of relevance to deliver capabilities in a meaningful way. And so you have to balance kind of all these different conflicting things, and that was always exciting for me. So
And I like the fact that you had to, I suppose, learn coding through a different language probably gave you a pretty good, I suppose, a pretty good first principles understanding of what was happening, rather than kids these days who are
right.
using a chat GPT to generate code and press run. You by definition kind of know, yeah, step by step through the code. Um, I want to then, like, throughout your career, you founded 13 companies. You've worked in, the federal space. You've worked in hospitality, retail, entertainment. Um, I suppose, did you know what you wanted to do, or like how did you design a career with so much variety, or what's the North Star that you've been running towards?
Yeah, I think, the beauty when you're an entrepreneur is that you get to pick what you're going to focus on. And, for
Hmm.
me, I've funded 13 companies, like you said, but I also built 187 products. So, a lot of IP, a lot of innovation. That led me to really get engaged in pretty much every vertical there is, from healthcare to retail to banking to to government. So really, that's great diversity and really exciting. So you don't, get stuck, in the same universe. And so I think it was always exciting for me to be able to compare and try different things. So that was the number one driver. But from very young, I knew I was going to be in IT. After I created my company, obviously, I finished high school. And I never had a degree, so for me it was really, the how to learn by yourself. Self-learning and kind of, ingesting all the knowledge that you have to know about to be able to be a good entrepreneur. It goes, obviously beyond the tech stuff, and so it was always interesting for me, to learn more. As recently as becoming a pilot here in the U.S., flying planes. So and by the way, learning mostly through YouTube. So you can't do that. So no limits nowadays as far as what you can do with YouTube and self learning.
That's incredible. I'm a first time entrepreneur myself, and the learning curve is incredibly steep. But like, if you've shipped 187 products, one of the questions that I ask everybody or most people that come on the podcast is, what would you do differently if you were, to take a new role, or if you were to start this role again? But you've had the opportunity to, to do it multiple times. What are some of the mistakes that you, I suppose, or the common pitfalls that you said you had to learn by yourself that make a good entrepreneur, that the mistakes that you've avoided, as you've continued in your journey and built another product and built another product?
Well, I think the biggest one is, thinking that everyone should be an entrepreneur. I think it's not for everybody, and I
Interesting.
think
Yeah.
it's okay not to be one. And I think, the biggest mistake I see people make is, trying to do it despite not maybe having what it takes to do it. And it's a very painful, lonely universe to be an entrepreneur. And it's okay to be number two or number three. In fact, they usually make more money than number one. And so, there's that debate of what's the right focus for yourself. So that's number one. And then when it comes to actual entrepreneurs, I think is building things in vacuums, raising money without a clear understanding of profits. For me, it drives me insane to see, particularly here in the US, all the VCs raising money endlessly and companies never making profits. And particularly in B2B, I think in B2C it's definitely different, but in B2B, if you don't have a clear path to profit, you're not building a company.
Yeah, well, and even in B2C, to be honest, there's like we've seen hugely VC subsidized food and travel and a whole lot of other startups that people can enjoy for a good while, but ultimately they have to make a business at the end of it.
Right.
Um, so I want to ask about your latest project, Ask Sage. It's an AI powered platform. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? What's like? It's a as best I can tell, I suppose a document creation project for the U.S. government. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it does?
Yeah, it started like that and became broader and broader.
Okay.
It's always like that with products. That's another pitfall, is not to be too bloated, I guess. But
Hmm.
first, Asage is a generative AI platform, so it's agnostic, so it can run anywhere. Air gapped on the government clouds, on commercial clouds,
Hmm.
on premise. It can tap into any LLM, so we're agnostic. So we have the same abstraction layer to be able to consume any large language models. And then we bring the security on top to be able to label data down to the user level and be able to then assign it down to the data cell to be able to track need to know and be able to know who has access to one and when. And then, we start to bring kind of plugins and agents and automations on top for different use cases, from coding to cyber to compliance to our latest, product we launched in a box with automation of the compliance, but whether it's a
Hmm.
GDPR, whether it's here, FedRAMP or NIST, all the automation of the cyber compliance aspect of the generation of the package for cybersecurity teams to be authorized to be consumed by companies or by the government. So we started, with government focused. We signed about 13,000 government teams in 27 agencies and 2,500 companies as well. Also, kind of companies focused on the defense sector and kind of providing support to the government. But now we expanded. We have a team in France, and we have expanded in Canada and other locations. So we also provide the Gen AI stack to regulated industries, mostly healthcare, finance. People that care about cyber, care about privacy. They want to have the single pane of glass of their Gen AI across all models with the same, bidding, tracking, security, and then, the use cases on top, right? It's kind of mind-boggling what we've seen in coding. For example, we see a 35x, increase of velocity. So one developer, for about $90 a month, turned into 35 people, which, for us, we're a very small team, and, the number of developers is drastically reduced by using our own product. In fact, 90% of the code of AssAge is created by AssAge.
That's incredible. Talk about AI eating the world. Like, how do you? I suppose as you said you use it to get FedRAMP certified, or companies can use it to get FedRAMP certified. How do you go about bringing a new product, and specifically like an AI product, to the U.S. government when they're and not just the U.S. government, like the various different like defense and intelligence departments, like when they're traditionally seen as quite conservative. I know you've a ton of experience in this area, but it's I don't know, how have you gone about like bringing them into like the age of AI?
Yeah, it's not easy, but there's a lot of bottom up demand, right? So
Hmm.
lower ranks and airmen guardians. We have signed the Navy, the Army as well. I mean, we pretty much have every aspect of the U.S. government now, and you see kind of this bottom up demand, and then a little bit of pushback on the top down, from
Hmm.
some of the leaders, mostly because of lack of understanding of what Gen AI is really. And then they kind of, some of them started to wake up and accelerate the adoption as well. So it's going pretty well. It's still pretty painful, I'm not gonna lie. And it's
Hmm.
it's easier for me obviously because I know exactly what is required to be able to run on government systems, because I was the chief software officer. So we had a 60 billion budget, 100,000 people building software. So obviously when you do that for 3 years, you know exactly what has to be done. So that's a lower barrier to entry for me.
Yeah,
One
of
of the key
course.
aspects is to make sure you're able to be deployed air gapped. You can run anywhere. So we're deploying on Kubernetes, containerized, right? We're not
Hmm.
bringing SaaS services. So it's all stuff that can be deployed, without internet, and then also kind of bringing the entire security stack. So, software bill of materials, CVs. In fact, we have 0 CVs on our stack, which is pretty unheard of
Hmm.
for any product on the planet.
I want to talk about, I suppose, you mentioned Kubernetes there, but I want to talk about your career and some of the stuff that you did in the federal government. So maybe can you give us a quick, and this is a long thing, but a quick overview of some of the roles that you had. I think you started out as like the special advisor for cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So there we built the first zero trust implementation in the government, back when nobody was doing it. So we kind of created it with Google and
Hmm.
built this first software defined parameter kind of dynamic zero trust enforcement layer, moving away from perimeter defense for the government. So that was probably 8 years ago now. And that was a first, and the government was leading the way in adopting it at the time. And then of course the government is very good at slowing down after the design of it. And that's exactly what happened. So we did a good job architecting it and designing it, and then it blew up across commercial, and now the government is finally catching up and deploying it.
Yeah, and it's an enormous initiative these days. If you want to sell, pro tip to anybody that's selling to the U.S. government, if you mention zero trust, it suddenly gets people's yeah, gets people's ears perked up a little bit.
It's a
What?
buzzword, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely. Well, like it is, but it also it's um like there's a lot to it that
Oh yes.
it speaks to the challenge that you want to solve. Like if you do it correctly, it's a
Yes.
little bit more, but it's definitely people are shoehorning it in absolutely everywhere.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the challenges that you were trying to solve and how different they were? I know like when I was reading, it was like challenges related to critical infrastructure, people trying to hack into grids, like the water
Mhm.
supply, whatever they could. Like how, like I suppose, how do you prioritize what to do in a situation like that? How do you say actually this is what we this is this is what we want to focus on, and these are the tools that we need to deploy. This is the framework that we need to deploy.
Well, it's actually harder than this because you can't decide what to deploy because they're run by private companies, and the grid here in the US
Okay.
is thousands of companies, so it's not even just one to go visit and talk to. It's hundreds, and often with no budget, and they end up putting TeamViewer on the device to with Windows 7 to be able to remotely access it because they don't have enough people to maintain it. So it's a pretty big disaster. I was pretty shocked when I went there, coming from the commercial side. The next week I started to buy a generator for my house, I can tell you that. So I became a prepper mostly because of my time in the government, because you see how bad it is. And, I wouldn't be surprised if 40% of the grid here in the US is already infiltrated by China, so that's pretty bad. So, you have to build awareness, you have to bring solutions, but, the government usually is very vague and very bloated. I was trying to bring very tangible architecture that people can actually deploy with a list of tools and inexpensive ways to get it done. So kind of removing the barrier to entry and streamlining the process. So I think we did a pretty good job with the architecture. We were able to show exactly what could be done, and moving to zero trust was saving the teams a lot of money by having more inexpensive ways to get things done, and kind of bridging the gap also between cloud and on premise, and both the SCADA systems and the traditional IT, and so it was interesting.
Yeah, incredibly challenging. And like, yeah, we work with and we sell into a bunch of I suppose those national labs and other organizations. I suppose like if it's not just if it's not like if you aren't in control, like, and you say, hey, these organizations are compromised, how do you go about that risk assessment, saying, all right, this is something that we have to live with? Is it just like constantly improving? What's the framework that you use to say, like, this is, we need more budget, or this is a risk that we're prepared to accept?
Yeah, I think it's tough, right? Because when we give people money and we do grants and stuff, they end up using it for something else. We did a
Yeah.
whole push on 911, where 911 is so unstable here when you call, emergency number. You can DDoS it and take it down in entire cities in a few minutes. So there's a lot of malicious actors doing that, and we tried to get funding and we got it, and then we got it to the cities, and then the cities spent it on something else. So then
Hmm.
what's the point of doing any of it? So it's very painful, right? That's probably why I got frustrated pretty quick and decided to move to DOD, because it's maybe a as important mission, but it's with the military, they get stuff done. It's not about babbling all day, and you have less stakeholders between the states, the cities, the companies providing the critical infrastructure on the DHS side. It's very, very painful because you effectively don't really have any ways to tell them what to do. So
Hmm.
even the assessments, right? It's often self-assessments and stuff like that. So it's not very good, and it's very tough to even prioritize, right? So we also all built part of the architecture. We had a kind of a self-assessment prioritization tool that was telling them, hey, okay, you have so many gaps, you're 80% non-compliant, but where do you start first, right? Which one are you going to tackle that's going to have the biggest impact? So we had a kind of a schema, right, that would tell you, here's all your gaps and here's the impact. So if you do this one, so if you do MFA, that's a bigger impact than this. So do that first. So kind of prioritization. So that was a great tool for the states and the cities and the companies to use.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Public companies have to do that for a whole load of other risks, but yeah, private companies don't necessarily have to, or government institutions don't necessarily have to do it for for themselves. Um, so you mentioned there that you moved into the Department of Defense. You worked on like a DevSecOps initiative, which you rolled out across the department, and then ultimately became the chief software officer for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force as a result of that. Can you tell me how you like? Yeah, tell me a little bit more about like even DevSecOps and how you introduce that to the Department of Defense. It's like obviously not something that's like understood by everybody, but I don't know, it's incredible that you managed to roll something out like, yeah, and have a huge impact and ultimately get promoted as a result of it. That's not quite not extremely usual in a department.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? When I started talking about containers, back in DOD, to IT teams, not just random people,
Mhm,
they thought I was talking about shipping containers to Afghanistan, so shipping containers, not actual software containers. So, there was
mhm,
a big gap of understanding of the basics of, Kubernetes, containers, all that stuff.
mhm.
There was also a massive vendor look into Pivotal and PCF at the time. So, we were actually the largest customer of Pivotal, 100 million a year out of 600 million of revenue. I thought I was insane. And
Mhm,
we knew, at least I knew he was going to die, and
mhm.
Kubernetes was going to win. And so there was a massive vendor lock-in. So there was a lot of toxicity also because the Pivotal team was pretty aggressively pushing against us because they wanted to keep selling PCF and not Kubernetes. And so there was a lot of toxicity to deal with. But what we ended up doing is focusing on very impactful outcomes. The first thing we did is deploying Kubernetes on the F-16 jet, on 50-year-old hardware, and be able to start running, Python and Go on something that used to run C and assembly, and be able to show, modern use cases on a 50-year-old platform. That was a big win in 45 days. And then we moved to, B-21 and F-35 and F-22s and ships and really sky was the limit. And then we did actually space with the first deployment of Kubernetes in space, and with SpaceX, and we did a lot of pretty cool stuff.
It's not just as well that you're making software easy to deploy, you're also making it more secure at the same time. So what sort of pushback did you get? How did you and how did you, not just from like other, or not just from vendors, but like internally, what, like how do you approach or how do you prioritize and how do you approach like in an organization that's known to be like pretty rigid?
Yeah, I think the the biggest pushback there was two, right? One is it's interesting how government employees that spend a lot of time with the same company get brainwashed by the company. So all those
Yeah.
employees working with Pivotal were pretty much eating and drinking the Pivotal Kool-Aid with no data to back it up, right? Stuff like, hey, if you don't use PCF, you lose a day a week of velocity for a developer. I'm like, that's made up. That's and there's no way you can prove this. A day a week of development. So I said, oh, I'm going to call Elon Musk and tell SpaceX that they should really move to Pivotal because they're losing a day a week of productivity, right? So, just silly stuff like that. So you have to deal with that side of the house, and then you have to deal with people that just don't know what they don't know and they need some training. So we built significant training and self-learning videos, and I had a whole bunch of content that we created. And then you have the other side also where, people are excited, they want to move fast, and they are pushing the innovation pretty fast. And then you have the other coin of that, which is kind of people, kind of what we call the frozen middle, right? People that are afraid of everything, always looking a reason to say no, and particularly in cyber, they just don't know any better. They don't know even Linux. I mean, when we started with some of this stuff, some teams had never worked with, basic, TCP/IP, because some of the nuclear stuff we do is before TCP/IP. I mean, just crazy stuff you have to deal with. So you have to bring everybody to the to 2020 back then, where they were stuck in the 60s, right? But once you take the time and you bring people with you, then you have momentum, right? And that's what we did, is we created the biggest coalition of the willing, and then sky was the limit. Everybody started to get on board, and we started to have deployment of DevSecOps across DOD, and within 1 year we saved 100 years of time, that would have been wasted without it, of productivity. So it was incredible return on investment.
I want to dive into one or two things there, but one thing that you've mentioned, we and like the team that's behind you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, like that? Because it's I hope it's not just the strength of your will alone that's changing the I suppose changing the course of the Department of Defense. What did the team look like, and how did you go about like building a coalition of the willing?
Yeah, I mean, at first it was, but the goal of that is to bring people in, and so I would
Hmm.
go, and one thing I had going for me is I didn't care about rank. While I was a 3-star general equivalent. People care about rank very much in DoD,
Hmm.
but I didn't care, and so I would work with enlisted and lower ranks to get stuff done, and I would look at expertise over rank, and so empowering people to get stuff done, and so they loved it, and they started to partner and merge so many different engagements that used to be done in vacuums
Hmm.
across DoD. We had dozens of teams building DevSecOps stacks for their own use, and so I went and visited everybody and start merging it into what became, Platform One with our Baby Yoda logo. If you want to Google Platform One, you're gonna see probably the most amazing government official logo on the planet, with Baby Yoda on it, and it's just amazing. And so we kind of consolidated and picked the best stack and aggregated the work and started to provide options, but still and diversity of options, with 20 plus databases and, you know, 17 programming languages and so on. But at the same time, it was kind of the same cyber stack, the same enforcement, the same visibility, the same login telemetry, right? So kind of mandating, what's important in cyber, but giving flexibility to development teams to be excited. So we didn't have kind of this one size fits all approach, and that helped us, get more people excited to join us and participate, uh, and willingly be part of it. And we still had, probably 10% of the teams kind of refusing to engage for the wrong reasons, mostly because of either ego or because of, they wanted to build their own things and for no valid reason. That's where, at some point you have to show up with a stick and the mandate, but the goal at first was to get everybody excited and join us willingly until I had to bring the stick. So
Ego in cybersecurity is not something that goes unheard of for sure. But that's yeah, it's incredible. I was reading earlier that there's 100,000 software developers in the Department of Defense, so that you're actually like yeah, I think the largest software organization pretty much on the planet. But that with no collaboration, no shared repositories, no shared tools, no shared stack, it's
right.
pretty much impossible like to build something that can be used elsewhere. So it's pretty yeah, just a pretty incredible achievement. Um, that achievement got you. I don't know if the word is promoted in like in the Department of Defense, but you moved into the role of Chief Software Officer for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that role was, how that worked?
Yeah. We needed a home for the engagement because
Yeah.
the DoD as a whole, what we call the Office of the Secretary of Defense (OSD), does not really run programs. So we picked the Air Force as the kind of the lead service for the rest of DoD. So this was actually a DoD wide role,
Mhm.
and the Chief Software Office was the first ever Chief Software Officer. I was the first CSO
Mhm.
for the entire department. And so that was a new role created specifically to remove barriers in the adoption of DevSecOps and software innovation, and kind of addressing both the cyber side and the deployment side and the scaling side of this. And so that's where we created Cloud One, which became our cloud office with 5 cloud providers, both on the unclassified and classified side. And then we created Platform One to do the DevSecOps platform across DoD as a service.
I'm like running a startup which sells into the US government, but I also know that one of your roles was to make it easier for startups to work with the US government.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are several people listening in who like both are trying to work with, but also try to advocate for new tools and systems and yeah, modern technologies. What's the what's the key to a good pitch? What's the key to like if you're looking to bring in a new piece of technology, how can you go about that?
yeah, it is tough, right? Particularly since I left, because they have not replaced me, which was a big mistake. There is no single point of entry, so that first, you pitch, okay, well, who are you going to pitch, right? Effectively, you're left having to pitch dozens, if not hundreds, of different
Mhm.
teams. There's no centralized place to go to anymore. That's a big loss. We had created something pretty amazing where we onboarded 1,000 companies in 2 years. that was unheard of before.
Hmm.
Um, and mostly companies that had never done business with DoD before. So that was a big win for diversity of options and having companies have a kind of streamlined way to get into DoD.
Hmm.
There's still a repository of containers called Iron Bank to be able to push your containers and be able to be adopted by Platform One and the rest of DoD, but it doesn't have the same power that it used to have when I was in the building. So it's a big disappointment. There's some stuff that sticks when you leave and some stuff that don't. And unfortunately, because of the lack of replacement, although while the Air Force and Space Force did not replace me, the DoD actually hired a chief software officer. So they have a great guy, Rob Wittmeyer, who is in charge of software for DoD. But again, the issue there is, DoD CIO has no funding ready, and so it's not really an acquisition shop. I was able to, actually acquire things, so it makes it harder for him to have the same level of impact. It becomes more like a policy shop, which is really something that does not get me excited. Writing memos all day. It can streamline a little bit the adoption, but it's very limited, so it can't have the same impact than we did. So
Completely. I want like so in between various different roles at I suppose in the Department of Homeland Security and then the Department of Defense, you also like you moved back and you worked in Qualys as their federal chief technology officer. What was it like going back, and I suppose even now you're back on the other side of the house, and then like I suppose going to good, I suppose going to develop solutions for how did you find that I suppose that relationship switch going from the vendor side to or going from internal to the vendor side?
yeah, I went to Qualys when they acquired my 12th company, so that was the driver of me
Mhm.
going. Um, and definitely, it was interesting to see kind of back the normal velocity of work, but because you're still serving the federal side, you still have the same impediments, right? So it's
Mhm.
still the same nightmares to deal with. Uh, some people argue you can do more on the outside versus the inside. I don't know. I don't think that's true. I think it's just a good excuse to justify leaving for a bigger paycheck. But I think you can definitely do more on the inside than the outside. Um, Maybe it depends where you go, but um, it was interesting, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't gonna be something I would do for very long, and the goal was to transition the company and move on, and that's what we did.
Makes sense. Okay. And like kind of switching back, but you said that like in your philosophy when you were working in the government was to move fast and take risks. Like I know you said they didn't replace you when you left, but is it still something that like you think, hey, the risks work out. It was like it was worth it. It was worth like making those making those moves.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the results talk for themselves.
Mhm.
While not everything's stuck when it comes to all the big achievements we did, I would probably say 80-85% stuck, which is pretty good. Massive time savings, massive taxpayer money saved, probably 5 billion in 2 years with a B. So that's a big win. So yeah, and we created a momentum that still is still going. It's not the issue, I guess, that they're facing is all these great people that are still pushing that momentum have no top cover now that I'm not done, not
Yeah,
here
makes
and
sense.
not replaced. So it just creates kind of a little bit more toxicity for these guys. They have to deal with more things that was kind of shielding them from, and it's big mistakes, from the Air Force. Funny, the guy that is supposed to have hired me when he was picked by Joe Biden, the president.
Mhm.
He has a confirmation hearing, in front of Congress, and he said, his three priorities is software and I forgot the two others. And so he committed, under oath in front of Congress to focus on software and replace me. And 3 years later, he has not done anything. So it's just interesting how you can get away with stuff like that. Go in front of Congress, say yes, I care about it. I'm gonna do it, and then literally do nothing, and nobody cares. It's just very sad.
I mean, I don't know a lot about Congress, but everything I do know suggests that that is not not super uncommon, unfortunately, to be
Yes.
able to go up and
Yeah,
say,
unfortunately, people get away with this stuff all the time. It's which is, pretty mind-boggling because, you're committing to doing things on the behalf of the taxpayer, right? That's your job.
mhm,
Just don't say it if you don't mean it. I never understood that. For me, when I committed to doing something, I'm just gonna do it. If I didn't mean it, I'm not gonna say it. It seems some of these guys just play politics and just want to get away with it and just tell you what you want to hear, and then they know the news cycle is going to move on to something else, and people are going to forget.
yeah, and kind of as you say, like there's a bunch of people in organizations that don't want to take risks, that don't want to improve, that just want to take the paycheck and um keep the head down, don't rock the boat. But yeah,
Right.
that's not the I guess if you started 13 companies, that's definitely not
No.
who you are. I want to talk a little bit about the future. I suppose, and some of the things you're excited about and some of the things you're a little bit worried about. Let's start on the excited side. You advise a ton of startups. I scrolled through your LinkedIn for about 20 minutes, just like going through the list of startups that you're working with. I suppose, first of all, how do you find ones that you like working with? And is there anybody you're really excited or you're particularly excited about?
Gosh, you're putting them on the spot. Yeah, so I got 250
We can
companies
take a
reach out.
pause. If you take a pause if you want to, you can like
No,
scroll
no,
through.
no.
So,
No, I mean, I got 250 companies I reached out when I left the government. Most
mhm,
of them were very good and good people, and
yeah,
so it was tough, right? So I picked 12, and then I had it roll over, until I create assays, and then I didn't have the time to do as much. But
yeah,
um, there's so many great companies, right? If you look at on the cyber side, you're gonna have companies like Aqua, Harness, Traceable, you're gonna have, Uncle, you're gonna have, companies in the Kubernetes space, like Rancher now part of SUSE, I mean you have, companies in broader innovation, right? Doing great things in kind of data analytics and Gen AI, and so there's so much going on. I mean, a good way to know for the people listening, like what companies are great companies, is to do what you did and go look at my LinkedIn, because if I pick them, it's not only because I believe in the product, but I also love the people, and I
mhm,
think it's equally important, right? The
yeah,
people
totally.
and the company and the product. And so, go check it out, because everybody I helped, I would stand behind, and they're awesome people, and they want to get stuff done. So
Yeah, and I'll throw a link into, or obviously throw a link into your LinkedIn in the show notes. But yeah, they genuinely are an incredible. It's not quite a who's who. There's still there's thousands of cybersecurity companies, but the list of names, as you say, like Zage and Mattermost and Aqua and Harness and Git Guardian, they kind of speak for themselves.
yeah, I
It's an
mean,
incredible roster.
great example, Gig Guardian in Europe, amazing
Yeah,
company. It's kind of
absolutely.
sad for me to have very few companies in Europe reaching out or engaging in the US. So it's almost like a completely different economy. And it's kind of scary because we only see Israelis and maybe a couple of UK companies and and mostly US companies. So it's not very healthy. I think we need more diversity. So
Yeah, well, speaking as an Irish cybersecurity startup, definitely agree with you. And I'd love to see. I think one of the things that the Israelis do incredibly well is they advocate and they push their network, and
yeah,
they bring like other companies up along with them, and there's a lot of repeat founders, which is super effective, in terms of like like yourself, you
yeah.
know the ropes, you know how to bring people in that next time.
They have a great talent pool, with the government
Yeah.
in Israel. So Polygon Cyber, they're just a bunch of great people that used to serve in their defense department in cyber, and then leave to create companies. So it's pretty cool.
Um, So I suppose let's look at the risk side. Like what do you think what are the things that you're worried about over the next couple of years from like if you're advising, the Department of Defense or you're advising I suppose other, you know, security companies or other startups, what areas do you think you'd be worried about?
Well, I'm gonna make you cry a little bit. I'll be upset, but they say there's a lot more to be worried than to be happy about. It's pretty concerning. Not gonna lie, when you see kind of what's going on, particularly with China. I mean, I'm not as worried about Russia, but I'm very concerned with what's going on with China, both in terms of kind of their ability to steal IP and kind of, you
Yeah.
know, embed themselves into companies, but also in terms of buying pretty much everything around us, all the way to innovating now pretty well and leading many times in AI, quantum compute, hypersonics, some of the key field that will define who's going to win the next wars, right? And that's pretty concerning. There's such a complacency here, particularly here in the US, where we've been leading for so long that we just think we're untouchable. And what you see is, the gap between China and Russia and the US slowly get smaller and smaller, all the way to sometimes now China leading in some of these fields. And that's very concerning. We should have been, you know, 50 years ahead and stay there instead of slowly but surely, letting China take us over. And it's particularly with AI, they have adopted Gen AI across all their classification levels, so they probably see the same kind of results I see here, which is a 35 times velocity increase. So one person turning into 35 people. They already have more people. They already probably work harder. But honestly, they complain less, and they have no choice but to do what the government says to do. So there's definitely great advantages for the CCP to lead the way. And now, with that kind of velocity of I don't even know if you can compete, right? And then I'm also worried about jobs. And when I see what we were able to do in most fields not related to blue collar jobs, I would argue probably within 5 to 10 years, probably 80% of the jobs are going to be replaced by something else. And so it's going to be a way broader impact than anything else. People compare it to some of what happened in automotive industry with robotics, but it's completely insane to do that, because the barrier to entry of the automotive industry robotics was super high, with very expensive equipment, versus the Gen AI stuff, $20 a month you get started, right? So it's um it's a no barrier to entry, anyone can use it. When you actually understand how to use it, it can take you, particularly for an entrepreneur, right? It becomes your chief of staff, your developer, your marketer, your lawyer. It becomes everything, at your fingertip. That's what I do. Everything of Assage was created by Assage, or logo, or legal docs. I mean, everything. It's kind of mind-boggling. Um, and so, I'm very concerned. I don't know how we can reinvent ourselves so quickly. I don't think we can. It's also moving much faster than the pace of traditional innovation that usually take, 20-year cycles. It's going to be something closer to a 5 to 10 years top. And so it's going to be particularly for like software engineers doing full stack, API connectors and basic stuff. That stuff is gone. You don't need those people to buck and write me the code, in a second. So it's going to be a big change.
Yeah. It's kind of terrifying on a whole lot of levels. Like you've also talked, I suppose, and this is kind of getting onto sticking with the China point. You talked a little bit about like TikTok as a channel for misinformation, and the Chinese keeping, or I suppose keeping on top of, or keeping on top, moving on top of that misinformation game. Is that an area that you're still concerned about? Do you think it's getting think it's even a bigger threat these days?
Well, it's probably bigger than that. I mean, it's way more than misinformation, right? It's a weapon. It's a
Okay.
national security weapon. People don't realize what kind of data they exfiltrate from the phones, from what you see, the videos you're recording with face recognition, with, you looking at your backgrounds when you're moving, looking at books, looking at everything you're reading, what you like, what you don't like. Of course, it can be used for misinformation, but it can be used to really understand kind of the population and kind of how to manipulate that. It could be
Yep.
used, when you're trying to steal IP, you have access to, all the employees of such companies. And now if you want to build friendships to say, hey, we like the same books, we like the same stuff, we should be friends, right? Let's go, go together out somewhere. now you can really tailor, the message to very precise understanding of the human side of it, which already is being used. It sounds like, movie stuff, but it's actually already happening in big, Fortune 500 companies. Um, and for kids, it's terrible, right? 25% of kids under 24 use TikTok for their primary news information, which is completely stupid and insane. So it's control of information, what you see, what you don't see. It's manipulating people. We see it already, with the Israeli Gaza conflict. Um, it's everything. It's also a data gathering tool on top of being a misinformation tool. They can sway elections.
Hmm.
They can, Facebook did a study back in 2016 where, they could probably sway up to 5% of the elections if used right, which,
Hmm.
effectively you control who's going to win.
Hmm.
And so, imagine now TikTok being way bigger and also much smaller and, you know, more aggressive. That's, I've been calling for the ban of TikTok for years.
Hmm.
Congress has been babbling about it with not much to show for it. Um, DOD banned it, but they took forever, and you still have dozens of, military personnel using it despite being banned, which, for me should have, you know, big repercussions to their careers, for allowing that kind of data to be accessed. With face recognition, China, when they go and pay, right, they use face recognition for everything. Imagine
Hmm.
now they have access to all the faces. They have built in all that data to, and even fingerprints, because the cameras are good enough to show your fingerprints if you're close enough. I mean, they have so much data, way more than people think, so it's pretty scary.
I definitely should have asked the question about the things you're hopeful about first, or sorry, last, so that we could have finished up
Yeah.
on that. Like, so this has all been absolutely fascinating. If you like, if we kind of have to finish up pretty shortly, but if you think about security and like what security teams, security organizations are going to look like in like 5 years' time, when that yeah, I suppose when that next cycle ends or towards the end of that next cycle, what do you think? What do you think like security in an average organization is going to look like, and what do you think security in like the U.S. government is going to look like?
Yeah, I think it's gonna completely shift from mostly humans to mostly AI, right? And I
Okay.
think it's going to be scary. It's going to be a velocity that's unattainable for humans to keep up with. You have, malicious actors now using AI to create, zero days and malware. The velocity of, CVs and new vulnerabilities is going to go crazy to a point where you cannot keep up with humans and you have no choice but to use AI to fight back. And we're gonna always gonna play this catching up game, and malicious actors always gonna be leading, and there's no silver bullet there, and it's gonna be probably way, way, way more painful to a point where, companies will have no ability to insure themselves, so be able to, control the cost of all this, and it's gonna become a major part of their profit loss. Um, and I think it's vastly underestimated compared to what people think it's gonna be. When I see some of the stuff we're able to do on the government side, on the classified side with AI, when it comes to generation of malware and, you know, um, you know, good code in a malicious way, and pass all the scanners and nothing can find it other than Gen AI, by the way, which does a good
Mhm.
job at detecting malicious code. But good code in nature, but malicious code. That is just very, very concerning.
I hear you. Um, Nick, I don't particularly want to end on a bad note. What are you what are you most excited about? What do you think is the like what's yeah what's getting you excited about the next 5 years now?
Well, since we're all going to lose our jobs, we're going to have plenty of time to learn new stuff and go fishing and do fun stuff. So I don't know, that's going to be a lot of fun. I don't know how people are going to react to it, not having something to do. Zuckerberg is talking about using, these stupid, augmented reality universe to be able to live there instead of living in real life. I hope it's not going to get to that. But, I think it's going to give us a lot of time to reinvent ourselves. And I think people that are excited, are able to do it are going to have a very exciting life. People that don't, that's going to be a different story. But, I think there's a lot of opportunities for sure for entrepreneurs, for innovation. But it's going to be a complete reinventing from pretty much everything we know. So.
All right. Look, Nick, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But if people want to follow you, follow your journey, follow Ask Sage, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just the way to go. So
brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to have you on again at some stage in the future. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.